Hey everybody, it's Brian at Summit Racing here, and here at Summit Racing, my team and I develop all sorts of cool new products for you. A lot of them engine related, but we do a little bit of everything. It could be suspension parts, interior parts, really anything at Summit Racing. But my team in particular, what I want to talk about today is Pro LS. Pro LS happened basically it was introduced, rolled out on Independence Day of 2018. It's a pretty awesome lineup. We've got Pro LS cams, we've got Pro LS pistons, we have Pro LS rods, a little bit of everything. And whenever at all possible, we try to make it made in the USA. So you see everything on the table here today: USA, 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 not USA, but finished in the USA. So really awesome parts, the highest quality. We make very, very big production runs of these so we can price them affordably to you. So that is everything about Pro LS. Really great parts, well thought out parts, easy to choose because we've got a very wide array of cams. The other cool thing about the cams is when we started off with 8700 through about 8715. So there was 15 original part numbers, and how we batched that was basically the truck swap cams for the trucks, the turbo cams, single T4 turbo cams, actually, I'll clarify that a little bit later, the automotive cams, and then finally the single plane cams. Pretty awesome cams. Now over time, we've listened to our customers, and there's evolving wants and needs that people have. So we ended up coming out with 8716 through 8720, and then lately, we wanted to do twin turbo cams. So what is the difference between a T4 turbo cam and what we're calling our T6 or twin turbo line of cams? The simple answer to that is overlap. The problem is, and I'll give you a little bit of a backstory on this here. About 5 years ago, my buddy Hugh Reynolds over at Reynolds Machine over in Bakersfield, California, had a single turbo Escalade. Had a 408, pretty stout, some TFS 235s on it. But the weird thing is it actually seized a piston. The owner was basically doing a highway roll with it, so a foot to the floor in a very heavy vehicle, and eventually just seized up a piston, which is really strange because the pistons that were being used have no history of ever seizing at 4,000 piston to wall. So kind of strange, send them a replacement piston. Same thing happens again. It's like, this is really odd, what's going on with it. So what it ended up doing is Dave Darge out there is an excellent tuner in California, and he started doing back pressure tests. And so this thing was pushing about 15 pounds of boost. The problem is that the back pressure, because everything was going out through a single 3-inch pipe, was hitting 3 times that amount. It was actually hitting 45 PSI of back pressure for 15 PSI of boost. And what is happening is it had a non-turbocharged cam in it, just an average automotive performance cam, something about 227 at 50. The problem is the cam had a lot of overlap, and all that back pressure is trying to shove its way backwards into the combustion chamber. There's no place for the heat to go, and it would seize up a piston. The fix was the camshaft. So the original line of cams that we did were all based on this idea of, we've got a lot of customers, my friends over at Sloppy Mechanics, for instance, a lot of T4 based turbos, singles, and so we limited overlap on those cams to about 2 degrees. Now that's very good, keeps the engine very healthy. We went as big as a 237, 234, so it was actually a reverse split. But that's basically where we basically stopped doing cams. Now since that time, we've been doing more and more turbo business, introducing more turbos. The world has changed a little bit. There are more T6 turbine housing. People now realize how much a T4 is holding them back, so they're figuring out a way to get a big T4 or T6 into this thing, or like basically a V-band style. And with that, these pressure, back pressure ratios will drop. It can be 2 to 1. It can actually even get down to the 1 to 1 range if it is very, very free-flowing exhaust. So with that, you can introduce more overlap. So the latest line of twin turbo cams basically starts at some 8722 R1 all the way through 8726 R1, and we basically introduce 6 degrees of overlap, 9, 13, 15, and eventually 20 degrees of overlap, with the biggest cam being a 251, 255 on a 117 plus 6. That's the other weird thing. So you'll see all of these numbers. Why do we put 6 degrees of advance into this cam? Well, the entire Pro LS lineup is basically done in stages. We start off with a stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe even a stage 5. Now, the cool thing about that is everything is incremental. The intake opening point is incremental. That is basically your idle. Your intake closing, basically on a truck cam can be anywhere from 27 degrees after bottom dead center to as much as about 55 after bottom dead center on the biggest like stage 5 automotive cam. So very fine increments there all the way through. And then on exhaust opening, kind of the same thing, and exhaust closing being the other side of the sandwich there when you're talking overlap. So everything is incremental. We have everything extremely well detailed in terms of the horsepower range, great descriptions of what kind of behavior you can expect out of these cams. So if you do, like as a for instance, you read through the description on the stage 2 truck cam, you're like, I think I want something a little bit more radical than that. Easy enough, just step up to a stage 3. So the really cool part here is we love talking to you folks. You guys are from all over the world. It's really fun to get to interact with people, exchange ideas, and with that, feel free to ask questions, and we'll kind of do our best to describe everything that we've got. The other fun thing is that we've had a very busy year, and we're going to have another busy year introducing more new parts. So we've got 2 new Beehive spring sets, SUM-174004 and 005. That is a 600 lift valve spring and then a 630 lift valve spring, a little bit more seat pressure, a little bit more open. But we have a tremendous number of cams that we've limited the cams to about 625 lift. And why is that? Well, the factory rocker has a scroll at the end of it, and anything over about 625 lift starts to run off the top of the valve stem. So we've got everything set for a max lift of about 625. You'll notice the trucks are often, we do have some drop-in cams, but the majority of the truck cams are actually developed around our very value-priced LS6 springs, which are capable of 550 lift. The biggest of the truck cams is about 600, so you can still run a Beehive. And then the automotive cams generally start at about 600 lift and get up as big as like a 625, 605 split there on the lift. So we've got the valve springs for you. We've also got lifters. Here a couple years ago, it was getting very, very hard to find Ls7 lifters. The Ls7 lifters are awesome because they're inexpensive, they're quality, they allow the valving inside of it internally is designed for 7,000 RPM operation, but it was getting to be very, very hard to find these lifters. Well, we being Summit purchased a whole bunch of these and made it make sense for the manufacturer to go ahead and do lifters for us. The other cool thing is that, in addition to the Ls7 lifters, we've actually been, these just came out here about 2 weeks ago. So these are some lifters that Morel makes for us based on their 7717 lifter. Great lifter, again, a drop-in, so it works with the factory trays and bolts, and just another great lifter option for you. LS7s are great, but this is just one step higher, and of course, value priced. The last thing that's pretty cool to talk about today is the connecting rod. So in the entire Pro LS piston lineup was done with basically standard stroke with a 6098 factory rod length with a 945 pin, like the earliest ones were, or the full floating ones had a 943 pin. So we've got both versions, a 945 and a 943. And then we've also got the very famous 6 1/8 927 pin, which is kind of like the granddaddy of the LS rods. I mean, that's what everybody started using was a 6 1/8 Chevy rod. Then finally those things started to become like a true on-center rod to fit the LS engines properly. And so we've had the 6098 rod and we've had the 6 1/8 inch rod out for a couple years now. They've been awesome. They perform well out, very close to 2,000 horsepower capable rods. Just an excellent track history, excellent finish. ARP 2000 rod bolts, price, awesome. But we have there's a very weird thing happening. So when the 5.3s, originally came out, they were actually fairly inexpensive. The 6.0s were expensive, but you could buy a 5.3. Well, it turned out that the 5.3 was really, really good with boost. The small bore, kept a head gasket in it. The problem is now that the 5.3 pricing was going up, it made it, so it's like, well, it's just not the good deal that it used to be. So a lot of people started digging up 4.8s. The 4.8 was originally introduced, I think, in about 99, and it ran all the way through 2016. But the weird thing about that is it has a very short stroke. It's about 3.25 inch stroke, right around in there. 3.267, I think. But it uses a 6.275 rod length. Very, very long rod. Nobody on the planet had an H-beam rod for these. Now we do. We at Summit are very proud to announce the very first H-beam specifically made for a 4.8. Obviously, priced right. If you got a 4.8, you're a guy looking for value. This is the rod for you. Again, got great bolts, great finish. The cool thing about it is that we have 5.3 and 4.8 pistons. The odd thing, not the odd thing, the really smart thing is that GM did is they made the compression height of the piston. Basically from the pin center line to the deck, they made that all the same. So you basically take a 5.3 high compression rod, and then you basically run that same piston in a 4.8 with a shorter stroke, and it becomes a 9.5 to 1 piston, which is awesome. That is excellent for boost. So you basically take our 2cc dome 5.3 piston, and now you just match it with that rod and that stroke, and boom, 9.5 to 1, very turbo happy combination there. So an excellent rod, excellent pin, excellent rings, and just on down the road with that. Any questions coming in so far?
So far.
Okay.
I know we've had some testing out there independently on some different. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay. So one of the cool things is we've worked with a lot of customers over the years, to develop these. We're pretty big on LS1 Tech. Tremendous community of people out there on LS1 Tech that have a lot of history. Great engine builders, guys going real fast, 6s, 7s, 8s, like nobody's business. So with those guys, we've introduced a lot of new cams in direct response to their needs, because they're like, well, this is very close, but we want something slightly different. So no problem. We just basically mix up the valve vents to more target exactly what they want, and the parts run great. Again, the pistons we rate them at about 1,000 horsepower. In reality, they'll do about 1,200 horsepower at the wheels with boost. We are also the very first people to rate the pistons by feet per minute. Now, why is that important? The connecting rods are kind of the same way. Well, if you run a short stroke, 8,000 RPM, you can actually put less piston speed than a long 4-inch stroke, just turning 7,000 RPM. So for that reason, giving rods a horsepower or like an RPM rating of 7,000 or 7,500 doesn't make as much sense as actually going off of piston speed. The other thing about that is the 945 pins and the 943s, just by virtue of those pins being a bigger diameter than the 927s, they're about 9% stronger than the 927s. So that was the reason why we started pushing, really about the first to start really pushing that 6N98 rod with the 945 pin. So for the same exact amount of money, you're getting a piston that's automatically 9% stronger, because the wrist pin is really the link in there between the piston and the rod. That's the part that is getting stressed the most. So that's something to think about too, is we have pistons and rods in all three of those combinations. With that, I had a question here on the install of a 113 plus 4 cam. So LSA is a little bit weird, and the problem is it can really mix you up. If you always think you need like a 113 LSA, for instance, and you have that on a 205 at 50 cam and a 215 at 50 cam, well, the valve vents are going to get rapidly skewed in the wrong direction. So you might fix one or two of the actual specs, the valve vents, like say intake opening and intake closing, would be great, but then you start messing up the exhaust opening and exhaust closing point. So for that reason, we work off of valve vents. Now, what that causes is the lobe separation will appear to be drastically different. Like our newest little truck cam, we have two of them actually that we're calling the torquinators. The 4.8 guys were having a problem. The guys that were actually towing with those things, really looking for horsepower all the way down at 2,000 RPM. So we developed a 200-205 on a 113 plus 4. So that worked out pretty good for those guys. That intake closing point is at 27 degrees after bottom dead center, which is about the earliest intake closing point of any aftermarket cam. So that cam is going to be excellent in a 4.8 or a 5.3 that is truly looking for 2,000 RPM operation. So it has more aggressive lobes, meaning less seat time in it than the factory cam, which is a little bit lazy, frankly. But with that, we also gave that thing 550 lift instead of, say 490 or whatever the factory is. So we're giving you more lift and basically tighter seat timing on that. The big Torquenator is fun. So that one is a 212, 218 on a 110 plus 3. Now, what does that do for you? Well, that basically matches that 33-degree intake closing point that is prevalent on the LQ9 and the LS1 cam, the original very, very good cam, 500 lift from the factory. That 33-degree intake point is, if you had an LQ9 and you know that the power range that is, we basically have taken that, we've opened the intake valve up a lot earlier. So what does that do? So when you go from about -16 overlap to something that's more like -4, -5, one is you actually get a little bit of an idle note to it. It's not so radical that it's super lopey, but it definitely has a lope to it. It's a nice steady lope, and it sounds awesome. The other thing about that is we increased lift to 600 on that thing. So when you open that intake valve up earlier, you are basically starting, that charge flowing into the cylinder, basically, 10, 12, 14 degrees earlier than the factory camshaft is. So you're going to pack a lot more air in there on the intake stroke, and then you still close the intake at the exact same point as the truck cams, like from the factory. But now you have a lot more air there on your power stroke, and that is what actually increases the horsepower. So with the automotive cams, you'll notice that those really start at about 43 degrees after bottom dead center and work their way up all the way on the stage 5 up to about 55 degrees after bottom dead center. So there is the trade-off between low RPM operation, increased mid-range, and then getting up all the way, to something that's designed for bigger engines running at higher RPM with some of the short runner intakes that are out there these days. The truck cams are basically capped off. The biggest of those is a 226, 230 on a 112 plus 4. So something that people were doing is they were trying to put LS9 cams in trucks, and that is a really pretty bad way to do it. Sounds great, but the problem is your intake closing point is at 50 degrees after bottom dead center. So you get the nice idle, but it doesn't make any power down low, and not very, very much in the mid-range either. So the 218 cams, like the 8720 R1, that is a pretty awesome little cam. It's kind of a dual duty deal. The valve events on that were a 218, 227, and it was very, very similar to the original GM hot cam. The problem with the hot cam is it didn't have a lot of lift, and the valves, the actual acceleration of the lobes was pretty poor, actually. So the original truck cams that we did that we were calling the stage 2s were basically a drop-in, 523 lift. It would actually work with the factory valve spring. And then we came out with a 600 lift version of that called 8720 R1, which is just a phenomenal combination. Now that cam, like I said, it's kind of dual duty. When Richard Holdner was doing his cam test, the sloppy stage 2 versus the world test, we sent 2 cams. We actually sent our 8706 R1 stage 2, which is a 226, 230 cam. Great cam. People make great power with it all the time. It works great in a 5.3 on up. And it's about, it does like a little bit of converter to it, but it makes power even starting down as low as, say 3,500. It's making some good power. The problem is that if a guy is running a 4.8, that is too big of a cam. Even a 5.3, it's still a little bit too big. So we came out with this 218, 227 grind, and we increased the lift, and it makes an excellent, excellent turbo cam. Again, we've got the intake closing point really more dialed in for the smaller engines. And what ended up happening with 8720 R1 was it actually made 15 more foot-pounds of torque than any other cam in the test at 3,500, and actually matched the horsepower of all the cams up top. All the cams ended up being very, very similar in terms of peak horsepower, including our own 8706 R1. So Richard Holdner said, in my opinion, 8720 R1 is the best cam here. It wins this test for a 4.8 liter engine. Again, it works fine in a 5.3 or a 6 liter or 6.2 if you want. but it is a awesome little cam that works great in trucks, and it works awesome in turbo applications. And there's another cam that just came out on the market that is very eerily similar in valve events to that. So what did we do to answer that? Well, we basically have a 10% off sale right now on the cams. So all the cams are priced at $269.99. In addition to that, we've got the cam and spring kits, where the ones that come with the truck cams, for instance, come with the Ls6 springs. The 600 lift cams work great with that 174004 600 lift beehive, and then everything else that's 625 lift, you end up going with the 174005 630 springs. Again, a little bit more seat pressure, a little bit more open, but between the cam and the springs, it is an awesome, awesome deal, because we got the best pricing on the cams, we got the best pricing on the springs. You put them together, awesome, awesome parts. Again, made in the USA, done in big quantities. The finish on these things is actually on a Landis 3LB, which, if you're not familiar with cam grinding, that is the Cadillac of camshaft grinders. So the Lobe finish on these is just absolutely awesome, and even just starts off with a made in the USA billet. So America, America, America. With that, I don't see any other questions coming in, so we're probably going to wrap it up today. But again, all sorts of new parts coming out. I'm going to be back with you again here in February to talk about some really awesome stuff. I can't talk about it today, but it is going to be pretty awesome. And then we've got some other things coming up in March and April. I mean, we've just got a steady rollout of really great parts. You'll see it up here on our Facebook page. You'll see it over on LS1 Tech, where we go through and describe everything down to a T. How we make them, how we decided to go ahead and do this. And again, great parts, always the best value. And with that, thanks for hanging out with me today and seeing some of our cool new stuff that we're rolling out here for Pro LS in 2022 with our team. So, see you later.